So after our panel on talking about violence against Indigenous people by the police, we started talking about how there may be other opportunities for other topics that were important to community, particularly for Indigenous people that were incarcerated, and how this was a really good way to get information out to them and be able to share information that's often not accessible to people. And so I'm really grateful that we can have this conversation because it's exciting, and I think there's a lot of people who have said, I'm really looking forward to when the panel comes, when is it going to be on? And so maybe if we can just start, if you can share who you are and what you do and maybe your connection to this topic.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Merissa Daborn, and I am an assistant professor in Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. I do not have a close connection to this topic. I am here to represent some research that one of our friends did, Jerica Hogarth, and it's on a comparative analysis between powers of policing and CFS. My work in research is about policing grocery stores, which is much different than what we're talking about today. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Bronwyn now.
Sure, yeah. I'm Bronwyn Dobchuk-Land. I'm Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at University of Winnipeg. And I don't have a lot of content knowledge about CFS, but the degree, like to the extent that policing is something that's done by both police and child and family service workers and all sorts of other people who are kind of deputized or put in the role of surveillance because of the tasks that they're asked to do in the system that we live in. So I know that like often one of the things I do is like an alternatives to calling the police workshop, which is very participatory. It's not prescriptive. And I think like with this issue, people often come with questions like, what are the police allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? What are CFS allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? What do I do if I've been wronged by CFS or by the police or, you know, by the state in general? And there aren't clear-cut answers that are satisfying to that, and that is so frustrating. But I do think that there's power in discussing with each other ways of thinking about this that can help us get outside the kind of like narrowly legalistic frame that we're encouraged to think about it, and think about some of the political, social, you know, power dynamics that can make us feel a little more empowered in the face of these systems that really do whatever they want. But I don't think that means that there's nothing we can do.
Thank you. Buju Anin, Leona Hunting Hawk Indigenous. Ditwane Wazibing Indunji. Hello everyone, my name is Leona Hunting Hawk. I'm originally from Rolling River First Nation, which is over by Brandon. I am a social worker by training, someone who worked in CFS for over 24 years now, and I still do. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Manitoba, taking Indigenous studies, or hoping to do a research study on Indigenous fathers in the child welfare system through the Department of Indigenous Studies. I am a mother and a grandmother and a proud Anishinaabe woman who sees that our community is often suffering at the hands of systems. I don't want to say people. I don't want to say, that all people that work within these systems are ill-intentioned, but the systems themselves are certainly not designed to help or uplift people. They're very based in, the systems themselves are very based in colonial ways of thinking, and there's something that we need to do to change all that. So thank you for having me today. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. I realized I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Quinn. My family comes from Saugeen First Nation and the Métis communities of Grand Marais and Traverse Bay. I have a consulting company and I write Glad Do reports, but I also teach as a sessional instructor here at the U of M. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I guess one of the questions that we were talking about earlier that maybe we can start with was around when we were planning the panel and what to talk about. Vicky had talked about that idea of justice ecologies, and I really liked that, and I think it speaks to a lot of what you each are kind of looking at and how removing some of that reference to systems and how communities can be empowered in a different way to be able to confront some of the violence that systems impose on communities. And I think that's work that a lot of you are doing or have experienced firsthand. And so one of the questions was kind of looking at because we had talked about how Bill C-92 is still bound by the limitations of the Indian Act and how colonial ideology still frames the way that we think about child welfare in a lot of ways, and it's very individualistic and kind of linear and is seen as being objective, even though we know that that's not really what happens in practice, because people still bring their biases and their assumptions and their traumas into that work when they're working with families. And so, Leona, maybe you can kind of start off with some of the work that you've done and how you've seen that maybe play out in both ways, like some of the good things that you've seen come out of the work that you're doing, but maybe some of the areas that still have room to grow or room for improvement.
Thank you.
Also, can you tell us a little bit about Bill C-92?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes. So for those that aren't familiar, Bill C-92, which is now law, if anyone knows the Canadian system, it's a bill and then it becomes law. So Bill C-92 was passed into law in June of 2019. It's now referred to as an act respecting First Nations, Métis, Inuit, children, youth, and families. So the idea behind this act is that the jurisdiction of child welfare has always fallen upon the provinces. It's like education. It's like health. It always fell within the provincial mandate. But for those of us from reserves, from First Nations, we know that the province doesn't have any jurisdiction when you enter Crown land. So federally, if we were going to start to make a difference when it comes to child welfare, it had to be federal legislation that had to be passed first. And so that's what Bill C-92 represents. Is it kind of now opens the door for Indigenous governing bodies, lovingly referred to as IGBs in the child welfare lingo, now otherwise known commonly as CFS agencies, Indigenous ran CFS agencies. It now opens the door for them to write their own legislation and hopefully move towards the goal of sovereignty. Each First Nation has the ability to do that. So as Indigenous people, we were happy and very excited about this, and yet as Indigenous people, we were very skeptical. What is the federal government up to? This seems a little too, we have to think critically always when it comes to. We've had a very contentious working relationship with Ottawa for a long time. So, but at the same time, many agencies have taken that green light, and they had been preparing for this for a long time. Peguis First Nation, for example, has been working. They were just waiting for Bill C-92 to go through. Nobody knew when it was going to go through. And when it finally did, in the summer of 2019, Peguis had been preparing for probably 3 years at that point. To get their own piece of legislation off the ground, their own child welfare law. They've been live now under that new law. It's called the Honoring Our Children, Families and Nation Act. Anyone's able to go onto the pegwithcfs.ca website and take a look at this legislation. It's quite incredible. It has allowed a little bit more autonomy when it comes to funding. PEGWIS still has to, have negotiations, very serious negotiations with the federal government about, how much money is going to be allotted for CFS. But at the same time, when that funding flows, PEGWIS CFS as an agency gets to design child welfare, which is almost unheard of. They get to say, our young people need homes, because what the research has shown us as CFS workers over the years is that young people leave the CFS system and end up in another system, the EIA system, the justice system, or they just plainly end up on the streets of our cities. And so PEGWIS CFS says, okay, well, obviously, we need to do something with respect to housing. So they've been building tiny homes for kids leaving agency care whenever they're ready to. There's no rush. They're keeping the kids in care up until about the age of 26 now, if the kid is voluntarily working with the agency and wanting this for themselves. And then there's a plan put into place about, if you feel like this is a suitable option for you, what would you think about having your own home? We will build it for you. We will place it on our property in a little tiny home neighborhood. And if at some point you want that tiny home up and moved over to the other side of the res, where grandma and grandpa live, or where uncle and auntie live, or mom and dad, then we'll do that for you too. So, freedom, right?
Wow.
Have you ever heard of an agency being able to do something like this?
And trust and respect.
And also that the care is continuing until 26. Yeah, I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
But to think of the work that had to go into this, because the feds, they're not going to make it easy for anyone, right? They passed the legislation and then they backed off. So now every single agency has to be like, okay, what's the plan? Here we go. Let's do this. So yeah, and I from what I've seen, many agencies are kind of watching to see what is happening in PEGWIS and seeing how it goes, and then moving cautiously forward. Yeah,
it's such a good example of what we were talking about a little bit before about this is Bronwyn speaking. Maybe I have to do that. About the legislation being a framework, but then it has to be animated by community planning. It has to be animated by the actual work of communities building structures, processes, etc. And just incredible that to think of a framework where when we're talking and thinking about individual interactions with CFS agents, or whatever we want to call them, whatever people call them, asking the question, who and what are you accountable to? Who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to anybody who I also feel accountable to? What values are you accountable to? Who are you reporting to? Do I care about the person you're reporting to? Just the idea of having those relations being more clear and close to home and rooted in love and care, rather than this kind of outside imposition of expertise.
Well, as Indigenous people, we have natural laws of kinship. We've known how to take care of our children for thousands of years. We've never needed CFS to tell us that. So those natural laws of kinship extend out to, sort of the ages and stages of life. So, the elders absolutely have a role in all of this. If we're going to reform child welfare in this country, then we need to listen to what the elders have to say, because the grandmothers and the grandfathers will guide us in that process. If we're going to reform child welfare in this country, we need to listen to what the young people are saying. What do you need? You've been in foster care since you were 9 years old. You tell us what you need. You're the expert here. I'm not the expert as the social worker. You're the expert on your own life, your own lived experience as a foster kid. So you talked about the ecological framework. Well, that's what it looks like in Indigenous communities. It's not just mom and dad. It's extended relations. It's everyone has a responsibility towards that child.
You're making me think about, because we had talked about the impact of child welfare on incarcerated fathers, and how we were talking earlier about how child welfare agencies are still very focused on mom and mom's well-being, and the files being kind of rooted in mom and mom's plans. But I wonder, a lot of the men who are incarcerated who are also fathers have also had involvement with child welfare and those experiences. And I wonder, how the dads who are experiencing the kind of push out that we talked about from child welfare as they're incarcerated, and even when they're reintegrating, how their experiences are or could be more, I guess, considered in how those ecologies kind of shape. Because I love the example that you shared about the tiny homes. Like, that's such a beautiful opportunity to provide agency and care and housing to youth who are aging out of care. And I know that a lot of the men who have experienced homelessness and who are now in the systems that we're talking about have also experienced child welfare. And often, because this is back when their birth alerts were still very much a regular experience for Indigenous families. And so do you see that as being something that could be or is possible, or is maybe coming, or do you think that that's still maybe something that needs a little bit of work kind of in the context of child welfare?
I can take this one, Quinn. This one's for you. Thank you for that question. It's very related to my PhD research, which will be on Indigenous fathers in the child welfare system. So I don't know if people are aware in our general society at what a disadvantage Indigenous dads are at. Mm-hmm. As soon as they come up against child welfare. So what the research shows is that fathers who encounter the CFS system, they actually fit into a demographic. They are young, they are poor, they are Indigenous or otherwise racialized individuals. They are underemployed, which is different than being unemployed. It means that the opportunities aren't there. Even if they want to find a job, the opportunity has been, sort of held back from them, either based on racism or just lack of resource, depending on where they live. They're undereducated. Same goes. It's different than being uneducated. They've just not had the opportunities that other men have had. And so when it comes to these disadvantages, we don't talk about it enough. And that comes from our, these age-old beliefs that we have about men and how men should be strong, they should be tough, they should be able to handle anything that comes their way. And we have a way of disregarding men and their ability to show emotion or even have or hold emotion. We take that ability away from them. Even as a small child, think of that little boy in your life who falls down and scrapes his knee. If that was a little girl, we would coddle her, we would pick her up, we would hold her. If that's a little boy, we often say to him, oh, get up, be mom's strong guy, you're okay, right? We teach them from a young age that what they're feeling doesn't matter. So as a society, there's a huge shift that needs to occur. We need to move away from that type of thinking. Boys, men, individuals who identify as boys, as men, they deserve the dignity of being able to feel. And how often do we take that from them? So when they encounter the CFS system as fathers, like you said, they've often already experienced the CFS system. They know what's what. And now here is that multi-generational cycle repeating itself, and now they have found themselves and their children the family that they were trying to build for themselves, mixed up with the CFS system, and it must be so disheartening and so discouraging. When we think about fathers who encounter this system, that demographic that I just described to you, young, living under a certain poverty line, Indigenous, we have to think at some point, did those fathers encounter the CFS system, or did the CFS system encounter them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like, were they targeted because of who they are, because of their skin color, because of their background? We had a discussion on assessment a little bit earlier, and social workers have a way of using people's histories against them. It's something that's very commonly done within the realm of child welfare. So if a person is a former foster child, and the social worker finds that out, well, what does that tell the social worker? It tells the social worker that person lives with a great deal of trauma. And so the social worker has to be on alert. What if this person is volatile? What if this person is violent? What if this person, should I be alone with this person? So the fathers are labeled before they've sometimes even met the social worker. Mm-hmm. The social worker has decided, I need to be careful around this gentleman. So yeah, the disadvantages, the challenges, the barriers often are just based on plain old stereotypes. Mm-hmm. The way that Indigenous men are viewed in our society as offenders, womanizers, alcoholics, all these wrongful stereotypes that have followed Indigenous men for decades. We as a society have a responsibility to look at that. We have a responsibility to look at, well, why do we do that, or why do we allow that racism to perpetuate? It's not fair, and it's highly unjust. But somehow, because it's Indigenous men, it's allowed.
Yeah. And I think, Merissa and Bronwyn, your work on surveillance, really, I think, compounds those experiences, because there's such a hyper surveillance of Indigenous populations, but Indigenous men in particular who are involved in the criminal justice system or targeted by the criminal justice system face all of the stereotypes and experiences that Leona's talking about at such a disproportionate rate. So I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about kind of the role of surveillance and kind of over policing, kind of in addition to what Leona is talking about, because it, I think, contributes to that idea that Indigenous men are violent, or Indigenous men are volatile, or have all of those characteristics that get imposed upon them before somebody even meets them because of their past experiences, or just simply by being previously involved in child welfare.
Or even just existing in space, right? I think that the policing system, even the things that are considered crime are rooted in perceptions of, disorder that are racialized. So, an Indigenous man drinking a beer downtown looks different to the police than a white man drinking a beer downtown. And in fact, we have two different systems set up. One of them is to walk that white man to his car so he can drive home drunk to the suburbs. And the other one is to, walk an Indigenous person to the drunk tank, literally. And so there's the policing that's rooted in, colonialism itself, and the imperative to have white people claim land for themselves, and make Indigenous people appear out of place on their own territory. But then, practically speaking, because that surveillance is everywhere, it's in And people have been encouraged to take that on themselves. People call the police, people report disorder, people feel uncomfortable, and I'm not, questioning their feelings, but their feelings aren't correct. They're feelings that are structured by, the racist world that we live in. But so the being noticed by any given system, being noticed as a problem by any given system, paired with the fact that our systems are so interlinked. So CFS, EIA, policing, and increasingly, like, we're encouraged to think that, like, multi-agency collaboration is something that, like, benefits people and communities. But what multi-agency collaboration means in practice is that, like, if one person enters one system, then all of a sudden all these other systems are implicated in that person's life and trying to intervene and surveil. So it's, like, literally just dangerous. I think you're absolutely right, Leona, to talk about being targeted. Like, it's really, and that's one of the things that, like, in policing studies, like with first year university students who maybe have ideas about the police but have never encountered them, versus the students who have had encounters with the police and this comes much easier to them. Like, there's an understanding that, like, being noticed is much less about what you're doing than who you are. Mm-hmm. It's being noticed by the police implicates you also in child welfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's so interesting that this panel, like there was the panel about policing, and then my understanding is that, like, there were guys who wanted a panel about CFS. And so clearly, like, Leona, like, you're really, with your research, like, tapping into something that, like, men need and want to hear about and be thinking about, CFS and policing. So I also want to know more about, like, what people's questions are about CFS and experiences. But yeah, just to say that, like, all those forms of surveillance, like, they are like each other, they're analogous, but they're also literally materially connected in ways that make it really difficult to escape.
I think what you said too about, like, oh my God, I don't know the phrase you used, but, like, the interagency, that wasn't multi-agency. Yeah. Reminds me of a question that we were thinking through, which is the concern that when you're out on parole, how does that then impact your ability to father, and what kind of risk are you then continuing to be at with CFS involvement? And kind of from what we've gathered is that, your PO could report you to CFS if you're having new children, if you have existing children that you're coming home to father, if they think that it's appropriate to report you to CFS, even if your convictions weren't for any reason kind of related to putting a child's life at danger. That can still happen, and it totally just depends on your PO. It depends on what CFS worker you would then get talking to your PO. And I think also going back to something you said earlier, Bronwyn, about how, like, the answers that we have are, like, never really, like, sufficient or good, or, like, what we want the outcome to be, but it's always just like, well, get a lawyer, and kind of proceed with that. And if you're in that situation, contact a lawyer. But again, I think, thinking through how all of these agencies are interconnected and continue to particularly target Indigenous men, specifically, as Leona said. Yeah.
I have two questions for Leona now, because, like, one of them, some ways that we think about, like, when we're thinking about police and their relationships to neighborhood organizations, we try to encourage them to think instead about partnering with the police, think of their role as, like, protecting youth from having to have encounters with the police. And so I wonder about how, like, Peguis, in this act, they've developed, like, how they've conceived of relationships with law enforcement, with police. And then the other question I had, like, just thinking about what Merissa was saying, like, when somebody comes out of incarceration into the community and they've got conditions, I mean, I already know from a policing perspective that sets them up to be surveilled at an incredibly high rate. Like the police can do can even more do whatever they want, right? Is that then like just bringing more surveillance to families too? Like does that make these men carry the burden of having to have their families that they're coming back to more under surveillance? Is that a thing, or is that just...
I mean, anytime you have two systems that are as enmeshed as CFS and the police, I mean, that certainly is a risk. Absolutely. Your question about Peguis CFS and Peguis First Nation is that they are well aware of this. So I encourage all social workers, I encourage all CFS agencies to do the research. If you're wanting to redesign or reform child welfare under Bill C-92, it's more than just writing your own act, right? It's a paradigm shift. It's a mindset of you're now entering into anti-colonial social work practice, almost doing the opposite of what they've been trained to do all these years. So when I say that, I mean that, in general, people don't understand what CFS does. Okay, so in general, people in our society think that CFS is a very honorable profession. Social work is a very honorable profession. CFS workers are honorable people because they protect children, and I have protect in air quotes. So back to that idea of protection. Thank you for bringing that up. There is nothing about protecting a child that means ripping them away from mom and dad and placing them under apprehension. That is not child protection. And if that's how you view child protection, then you're doing it. You're doing it very, very wrong. So people in general society believe that CFS is this honorable job, but CFS is a system. It's a system of oppression. And it's a system of colonial thinking that has been designed to, sort of keep racialized people down. So that old relationship, that hand-in-hand relationship that CFS and the police have had goes back 100 years, right? Back to when the Indian agent needed to call the local Mountie or the RCMP officer to get kids to residential schools, which of course was the precursor to today's child welfare system. CFS is when I bring the example back to Peguis, Peguis is well aware that CFS is not a system of helping. It's a system of protection. It's a system of oppression. It's a system of destruction. And so under this mindset, that's what they've been trying to move away from. Peguis CFS and Peguis First Nation is very aware that CFS is heavily related to race and poverty because they've done their research. CFS is not a parenting issue the way that the general society believes, right? If people can't parent, we should call CFS. No, that is a
call CFS on them.
That's a great cover-up. Yeah, that's one of the greatest cover-ups of all. CFS is related to poor people. The poorer you are, the higher likelihood you have of coming into contact with social workers, child protection workers, because if you can't provide your child with a meal, then all of a sudden that becomes a state issue, right? The province has the ability to step in and say, question your parenting or wonder why that meal is not forthcoming. But where the questions stop or where the assessments stop often at the intake level is, why can't the parents provide that meal? That question is rarely talked about.
That it's manufactured by the state.
Yeah.
For it to be really difficult for Indigenous parents who are living in poverty to be able to do that. And I wonder if there's anything from the research that Jerica did on, because we talked about just walking into someone's home and just kind of doing whatever you want. And from what I understand of her paper, that's totally, like, there's nothing that says that can't happen.
Yeah. So in Jerica's research, she compared the powers of policing in CFS and specifically looked at powers of apprehension and warrantless entry. And one of the cases that she talked about was CFS Western Manitoba versus PFM. PFM was the mother in this case, where a CFS agency worker went to their home at 10 p.m. to drop off a letter and knocked but didn't receive an answer. It's 10 p.m. I wouldn't answer my door either. But then just tried the doorknob and went into the house. And the child was unattended in the living room, but the parent came up from downstairs. So clearly, like, there was still parent supervision in the house. And then the worker then went to the basement and found drug paraphernalia and apprehended the child. I believe in this case that evidence ended up being taken out, but then there was prior evidence that the court still allowed that still maintained the apprehension. And then similarly, there was another case, CFS Western Manitoba versus AGA, where a worker attended the home and found the child with a babysitter, but then proceeded to just continue to kind of poke around the property and found evidence of drug paraphernalia in the garage, and then apprehended the child. And again, I think that case was similar in that, like, the apprehension was upheld even though they were able to get that evidence removed because they violated the parents' charter rights by entering their home unlawfully. There was no reason for either of the workers in either of those cases to think that the children were in immediate danger. And so, again, Jerica kind of talked through in this research about how the courts have really pushed this idea that apprehensions should be similar to the powers of police to arrest, but it really grants all of the power of criminal law without any of the protections, which is that in criminal law and police, like, they are supposed to be respecting our charter rights.
And the standard of proof is different. I mean, beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal court versus family court.
Mm-hmm. And with, like, police, I think there's, like, that they need to, like, know that there's a crime ongoing, whereas with CFS police, it's just like a child in danger, and that can be so broadly interpreted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the questions that I was asked in regards to understanding what constitutes immediate harm, and questions about children being apprehended but placed with family members who themselves may not be healthy or may be kind of emotionally volatile, and some of the emotional abuse or things that children may experience is not seen as immediately harmful to the child. And so that was one of the questions that came up, is when children are placed with the family member of another parent. This came from a dad, placed with the family member of another parent, and they have concerns about that family member being emotionally volatile or maybe otherwise unhealthy in the eyes of the parent who is incarcerated, and child welfare not taking those concerns seriously because it's typically like physical danger that's seen as a problem. What would you suggest in terms of trying to address that?
Well, back to that ecological framework that you were talking about. So for anyone that's not familiar with that word, ecological just means that we would be looking at everything. As social workers, we should be looking at everything with respect to that child, not just the physicality of, that child's world, but spiritually, is their emotion, are their needs being met? Emotionally, psychologically, are their needs being met? Educationally, socially, mentally, intellectually. So, almost thinking, as Indigenous people, if it's familiar to you, maybe you, think about the medicine wheel, because that will give you an idea of what we're talking about when we say ecological. So every single aspect of what makes you a human, not just your physical environment. So finally, we've been moving towards, as the social work as a profession, we've been moving towards, the idea of assessing families and kids from an ecological framework. Tula Heinonen, Amanda Burton, and I forget. I'm sorry. I'm missing the third name. I can see it, but Deanna Hallonen from the Faculty of Social Work here at the University of Manitoba have recently released, within the last 2 years, released a textbook on properly assessing families from an ecological perspective. And when we're talking about Indigenous families, especially, we're thinking about everything, not just their physical well-being. Their ceremonial needs. Do they have a name? Have they been giving their colors? Do they have a clan? What are their relation to the land and to the animals, and things that people, social workers operating under a Western framework would never ever think of. Why is that important? Because it is. Yeah. It's so much more important than if there's food in the cupboard. Who's really rocking child welfare? It's not Canada, it's not the US, it's not New Zealand, it's not Australia. It's the Nordic countries in Europe. If you want to look at some pretty awesome child welfare research, look at Sweden, Finland, Norway. There was a study recently done in Sweden that said we need to start considering kids' emotional needs more. So much more than just their physical needs. And when the same question was posed to American social workers, the American social workers were like, why would I do that? Why would I go to court and talk about kids' emotions? That seems like a real waste of my time. That's not how you assess risk. Yeah. You assess risk about, what are the parents providing for that child? Yeah. So, it's that limitation of that, that colonial way of thinking that we need to move away from.
Can I follow up
of
on
course.
that? Yeah, I was just going to say, like, even in the question that you asked, as somebody, like, I'm a parent of 2 young kids, and to imagine a father or a mother or a grandparent, like somebody who loves and cares for the child and knows the child, being disqualified as an expert on what kind of like what that kid needs, and just like recognizing the pain and injustice of that, and the benefit of a system instead that, as Leona describes, like, it seems to me, takes kinship into account and allows, like, it reminds me again, this is all I can do is make parallels to criminal justice, but just the way that, like, by virtue of being labeled a criminal, you are no longer allowed to be an expert on what you need or what's good for you. And then the system does all this work to, like, employ people to assess you, etc. And like, we're not even taking the base of that family expertise and that knowledge, and it's just crazy making, and seems to make so much more sense that, like, these decisions need to be made with people who really love a particular child, like, at the center.
It takes me back to I think a conversation that maybe we had before we started recording, but around both, and we've talked about it already, but like the kind of like mother-centric nature of CFS, but also we use this term like active parent, like who is the active parent, and I think that obviously I think it's kind of taken for granted or just assumed that when you're incarcerated you're no longer an active parent, and I think that just goes to kind of speak also to like what Bronwyn is talking about, like who actually has the experience and like care for these children, and being incarcerated doesn't kind of like automatically sever that, even though these systems are trying to sever those kinship ties, and yeah, I just think about it in terms of like how many men who are incarcerated, who are fathers, who may not be considered active parents or even kind of have any legal rights through CFS, are still very much parenting in whatever way they can within the systems that they're in. And yeah, I just think that's really important to recognize.
Yeah, and it's so, I think, frustrating for so many people because to get that label of being like an inactive parent when you are doing the work to be involved and to have a connection to your kids and to try and advocate for where you want them placed, or to just have somebody hear you on what you want, you know, whether that ultimately becomes what happens is different, but to just be heard and respected and what you want for your child, like I totally
just
agree with you.
You're locked up doesn't mean that kid doesn't live in your heart. And
to not have what you, especially for dads who have experienced child welfare and who have that experiential knowledge and understanding and trauma of that system, to be completely dismissed and discredited or discounted because of their experience as a person who is incarcerated seems so backwards. And to have that happening from Indigenous people who work in child welfare, I think hurts a little bit more, because you want to trust that your own people will see what's happened to you and not be laterally violent or be maybe a little bit more understanding to what your experience is or what concerns you're trying to voice. And to have that, there's a few dads that I know who have experienced this quite recently, where they've been trying to say, the placement that my child is in, like, I'm not comfortable with that placement, or I think that they're not receiving the things that they need, and there's a bit of an arrogance from the agency. It's like, oh well, you're just an incarcerated guy, like all of the stereotypes that you've talked about, right? And just to be completely dismissed is so disheartening, especially when I think about that, like, kind of co-optation of Indigenous values, where, it's like, what values are you accountable to? What systems of knowledge are you accountable to? And you say, oh, we follow the 7 teachings, but that's not reflected in anything that they're doing. And that's heartbreaking, because there's nowhere to take that, right? Like, there's nowhere to voice that concern. And it seems that parents who do have the confidence to voice their concerns are labeled as problematic or disruptive, or, there's all of these other connotations that, come into the file, like, oh, this person is disruptive, they're a complainer. All of these other things get placed upon them. And then that's a really hard thing to disentangle yourself from. And I was kind of thinking, I was reading Eva Jewell's chapter in Making Space for Indigenous Feminism, and she wrote an article called Toward an Anti-Colonial Feminist Care Ethic, and she was talking about, like, care regimes in the context of, like, lots of different areas where people are caring for others. And she said that care is the site where we as Indigenous peoples experience the violent denial to our intergenerational kin responsibilities. And I was thinking about that in a systems context, and how, like, feminist care ethics could very much include and involve fathers in a really beautiful way. Because right now, like, it's kind of odd that the system is, like, very paternalistic and is still like not willing to consider their hopes and wishes and perspectives on how they want to see their kids like flourish and thrive, and the types of environments that they want their kids to be in, or the resources that they want their kids to have access to. Like, the ceremonial piece is so big, and you know, I've heard a couple of people say, oh well, the kid has a regalia. Okay, they have one, but do they dance? Do they know their name? Do they know their clan? Are they connected to someone who can teach them those things and help them to find their own way in that? Or is it just sitting in a box and maybe they put it on, maybe, you know, it's just there? And so I kind of like, I think about that idea in the context of futurity also. I don't know if you've read Laura Harjo's book, Spiral to the Stars, but she talks about Indigenous futurity in this really beautiful way of how community can come together through kinship and stories and ceremony and all of these things that already happen, but that systems seem to want to sever and interfere with. And then you add like the surveillance onto that, like, because I think about how when you get labeled as problematic, like, you know, it's kind of a weird form of surveillance where then people just see that in the file and they're like, oh, this person's difficult or problematic, or, you know, they complain, and it's hard to disentangle from that. And so how can men advocate for themselves and have a voice for themselves and their kids while, you know, hopefully not experiencing lateral violence from Indigenous social workers who kind of reinforce those stereotypes against them?
Isn't it all about connection, right? Isn't that what we're truly talking about? And reclaiming the old ways.
Yeah.
So incarcerated or not, you're a warrior, and don't ever forget that. And warriors had traditional roles, as our men were always peacekeepers. They were in charge of keeping peace. Warriors, you know, there's that old stereotype that people think that warriors were in charge of fighting. so silly. Maybe warriors had a role in defending land and territory, and certainly defending the more vulnerable, the elders, the women, the children. But our men have always been peacekeepers. They've always been protectors. They've always been providers in our communities. So I think, you know, you talk about advocating. Start there. You know, if you're ever feeling this would be my guidance that Indigenous males could take, as you know, from a grandmother. Start reminding yourself that you are a warrior, and nobody can take that role away from you. And so what you would start with, or a jumping off point, would be, you know, advocating for yourself, finding that voice. Maybe that voice has been taken over the years by people who have hurt you, harmed you, disappointed you, let you down, abandoned you. But it's time to regain that voice. And the way that you would do that, having voice, finding voice, is to remember that as a father, you have rights. Even within the colonial system, you can look at the Manitoba CFS Act online. Every parent has rights if their child is involved in the CFS system. You have the right to identify a safe place where that child should or could be placed. You have the right to bring supports with you if you have to have a meeting with a social worker and you're not comfortable with that. You have the right to receive services in a culturally sensitive way. You have the right to receive help and resources that are appropriate for you, not because the social worker says they're appropriate for you, but they're actually suitable to what your needs are. You have that right. You have the right to attend all and any court proceedings when it has to do with your child or children. And you certainly have the right to give your input or insight into the agency's case plan. So I would start there, you know, advocating for yourself. And if that if that seems a little bit too impossible, then find someone who would guide you through advocacy. You know, a grandfather or an uncle, or someone who's going to mentor you into helping you find that voice that had been taken from you. That's where I would start.
That's much more concrete than anything I would say, but just thinking about what you were saying about connection and like for those of us who are outside the system or working in other systems or advocating, like it just really highlights the fact that like our work also is to continue to advocate for the conditions that allow people to advocate for themselves. So I mean, reducing incarceration in the first place, right? Like preventing the systems from being able to try to like disconnect or sever ties, but also like, you know, housing improves men's place in their ability to advocate for themselves, like meaningful work, housing for mothers also. Like I even just think about the dynamics of insecurity under which like custody becomes so fraught, and it has to do often with two powerless parties, you know, like so like empowering both, you know, so that relationship can be healthier. Like all of this connection and kinship is going to be stronger if, you know, like those material conditions are furnished. And also I wonder about like, is there precedent or the existence of well, I mean, this is a stupid question. Like, of course there is. Like, men talk to each other informally. Women talk to each other more, maybe. But like men's support groups, like around CFS advocacy and stuff. Like, does that exist in any formal way?
There's a few like dads programs and dads groups in the city, but
like there's this world that we live in is so messed up. Like where men's support can like slide into men's rights or whatever, like above women's rights. But like what Indigenous frameworks offer to everyone, like including non-Indigenous people, is like a model of an ecological model, if we want to frame it through the like, you know, a different Western scientific lens or whatever. But it's like nobody is okay unless we're all okay. Like we have to like strengthen the entire ecology in order for so if men's rights are not being honored, like the route toward that is strengthening the entire context in which our communities are you know, not thriving. I mean, there's so much, like when you talk about the Peguis legislation that I just started reading through it as we were sitting here before the recording started, and like it's just incredible too, the different ways that like childhood is even conceived. Like children are respected in a different way in the language than the like very, because even to just imagine a child as separate from their parents and a child as being able to be healthy without their parents or their kinship ties, like requires a pretty messed up idea of children, right? So yeah, the core ideas about what children are, their place in the community, I mean, that just seems really evident in these efforts to think through child welfare differently. I'm just curious about that.
And I think showing those things from a loving place, like there's all of these experiences and stereotypes that come about men. You know, I talked about like men being violent and volatile and all of you know, these different stereotypes that arise, but a lot of times they are encountering systems and kind of the actions of systems that are violent and volatile and dismissive. And so that kind of idea earlier about including men, like through that idea of feminist care ethics that are rooted in Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding, really that's coming from a place of love. And when men see and can experience love, there's a huge shift, right? but systems often don't allow for love to be kind of the structure from which they operate. Like, it's always very like rigid boundaries and, you know, this like professionalism and these like silly, not kinship related ways of working. But when you can shift to working from a place of unconditional love, where you want to see people do well because you want the community to do well, like you were talking about, there's such a beautiful opportunity there to have that shift come in where people can experience that, and then that has an intergenerational impact. Because the reality is right now, like the way that the systems are currently functioning and the way that they're impacting parents and grandparents and kinship networks is, you know, there's a lot of work to do intergenerationally to try and I guess, you know, stop that trauma at some point. Because, you know, there are, like you said, like there are some social workers who really take that, and you talked about really vetting people or who are going to be working in those positions. And I think that that's really important. We talked about, you know, what's the benefit of having somebody who has lived experience and who has that grassroots and community knowledge versus somebody with, you know, an RSW, but also acknowledging and understanding that people who work in systems also come with their own traumas. And so how do parents navigate those things? Because, you know, conversations with social workers can get really intense and can get really heated, and there's things that, you know, I think from what I've seen get said from both sides that are really harmful and really hurtful, but the social worker has kind of the clout of the agency to protect them, but parents don't. And I think dads often get that really harsh label that it's like, oh, well, that proves that they're volatile or violent, or I can't be alone with them, like you were talking about, when really that's not the case. Like, it's understandable that people would get angry and frustrated and maybe not have the words or the language to convey that to a social worker who's saying you don't have any right to talk about where your kids are. And it's like, well, if you can step outside of that, it's like, obviously that's frustrating. Yeah. And so I guess what would your advice be to dads who are encountering that, who are kind of coming up against all of these roadblocks? You know, are there advocates that you know who you would recommend people to talk to, or are there different ways of conveying their concerns that might be, you know, really helpful, that social workers might hear in a different way? Or how might that be improved for dads who are trying to navigate those nuances of kind of interpersonal boundaries and communication?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. The system itself is so powerful, and so dads feel like they don't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. And even before they encounter CFS, they feel like this. We need to talk about the idea that fathers themselves are feeling very, very low about their role as dads. There was a really interesting Pew survey done in the United States in 2007 that talked about how 55% of the dads that were surveyed said that they're not doing the job that their dads did. They're not doing the job that their grandpas did. They're not. So dads are already feeling low. So the last thing that the social workers need to be doing is pushing them down even farther. They need to be showing them or empowering them through resources and knowledge sharing. You know, you as a dad are very, very special. dads are not expendable. That's another weird stereotype or weird rumor that's been floating around, in I guess within the era of single motherhood over the past how many decades. But dads are not expendable in their children's lives. Fathers play an extremely crucial role, especially when it comes to their child's development related to play, related to self-regulation, controlling their emotions, learning how to control their emotions. So moms are very unconditional in their love. Moms are very, come here, let me hug you, let me hold you. But dads will actually challenge their children, and they'll actually nudge them towards more challenging situations that may take that child out of their comfort zone. That's what dads do. And then dads will stand on the sidelines and go, I'm right here, but you need to go try this, whether it's a new sport, whether it's, a new acting class, whatever it is. And so dads will nudge their kids out into the world and say, the world might harm you, but if it does, I'm right here, buddy. I'm right here for you. That's what dads do. And so there's an interesting theory called the father-child activation theory that speaks to that. And how they do this, how fathers do this is through physical play. They teach their children to do stuff, but they do it through activity. Whereas mothers will sit down and read a book to the child. They'll have some cuddling time. Dads are like out and about. Let's do this. Let's go here. Let's go meet this person. Let's experience this together. And then informally, the dad is showing the child that the world is a safe place, that you don't have to be scared. And then that teaches the child to self-regulate their emotions. So there's very, very interesting research on the crucial role that dads play in their child's life. A child will benefit by having a positive, healthy father in their lives. So when it comes to CFS, that's CFS's role. Not policing the dad, not judging him, not telling him what to do. Your role is now to support him as a dad. Yeah. So if he has maybe some areas for improvement, then teach him. Yeah. Don't just sit there and criticize him. Show him through, land-based activities, or give him referrals to the local spiritual guide. Whatever it is. I can use PEGWIS as an example. So PEGWIS CFS also recognizes that they are not the be-all, end-all of community well-being in PEGWIS First Nation. They have strong partnerships with Sun Lodge, Rainbow Lodge. So then they have places to refer mom and dad when mom and dad need some guidance. So then it's not the social worker providing that spiritual guidance, because they're not qualified to do that. For that, you need someone who knows medicine, so someone who lives their life by or on the land. So that's what CFS should be doing, is researching, knowing how crucial fathers are, and then taking that research and designing your programming to meet fathers' needs. And then, of course, sitting down and talking to dads, saying, what do you need, or what would you like to see? An annual men's gathering. All right, well, let's pull that together. What would you like to have at that men's gathering? Listening, sitting and listening. For anyone who's working with a CFS worker, if your CFS worker is talking more than they're listening, that should not be occurring. A solid, respectful social worker will be listening more than they're talking. And if they're talking at you as opposed to talking with you, even that planning, that plan for your child, they should be developing that with you, not for you. So, just feel that out. And if you feel like that social worker is not someone that you can trust or not someone that you can work effectively with, then take your concerns to their supervisor. And if that person doesn't listen, take your concerns to the director, and on and on and on. Everyone has someone that oversees them in CFS. So back to that advocacy.
I also, I want to talk about fatherhood too, and the role that systems, I think, can play in like I'm just thinking about the experience of being a parent without having any of these systems involved in my life, and how I'm constantly made to second guess my capacity, my ability as a parent. I'm even, like I'm a university professor. I still wonder, am I doing right by my kid? I have moments where I feel so low, like I'm not good enough, etc. And so I imagine that being like really compounded if you're subject to these systems that are literally evaluating like your parenting capacity on a daily basis, like sometimes on your worst day or in the worst season of your life. And just thinking about like all that you talked about fathering Leona, which I think is beautiful and amazing, but also like even if you're like imprisoned, like something a father and a mother can do that nobody else can do for their kid is like love them and like them more than anyone else. Right? And like that's your fundamental job, is like to have that connection with your kid, to love them unconditionally, to like them, to see them when they're in front of you and like see them for who they are, let them be who they are. And you can do that, and like just to reaffirm the fact that like nobody loves your kid like you love your kid. And that's really, not to be trite, but like love is at a certain level all you need, and a lot of these systems get in the way of people feeling like confident parents when they could step forward with that confidence, even if they feel like they're not being good enough. Like the insanity of the fact that like parenting classes seem to be only offered to people who are in like involved in CFS. Like my fucking parents could have used a parenting class, like I have benefited from free parenting classes, and there's a lot about parenting that's not intuitive. And like if we think of the most generous reading of parenting classes, it's like communities of people with experience coming together to share like their experience about what works best in parenting. Like don't also let people feel like you're a bad parent because of the class circumstances, the housing situation, whatever that you're in. Is a message I really want to get across. Like even the idea of like there are very particular, obviously, intergenerational traumas associated with colonialism, and I am not Indigenous. I can say as a non-Indigenous person, I can observe that there are intergenerational traumas in my family that don't result in the same systems involvement that they do for Indigenous people because of the racist targeting of those systems, So also I think there has to be a certain resistance too to labeling like trauma as being something that just belongs to one group of people. Like we're all struggling with this as parents, and yeah, like if at all it gives you confidence to advocate from the position of knowing that like you are the best parent for your kid, and that everybody feels like they're messing up all the time, and don't let your social worker tell you that like you're a particularly bad parent.
I'll add something quickly before you want to direct us somewhere else maybe. I've been thinking a lot about Kim Tallbear's work as we were talking or thinking about this panel, and her work around settler sexuality in families. And she has this chapter, Making Love and Relations Beyond Settler Sex and Family, where she talks about how oftentimes Native American families are like viewed as broken, and again, scare quotes around the broken, but that she has come to see that as just like that a failed nuclear family is actually just Indigenous people exceeding settler expectations of what family is. And she kind of goes on to talk about how like within decolonization that it's not just an individual thing, but that collectively we need to oppose these systems that are labeling Indigenous families as deviant, and be thinking about like how we can have policies and systems that actually more expansively support Indigenous kinship networks, which I think is why like PEGWIS is amazing to think about what that's actually going to look like. But I think it also kind of goes back to, yes, like dads need support, like what are the kind of tangible things that they can have access to in supporting them. But I think it's also about us recognizing that there's ways that we need to be supporting fathers like along the way as well. And especially thinking about incarcerated fathers and kind of the systems that they're up against. I was reading Alec Karakatanis' new book, Propaganda, and he opens it with this story and this picture of kids who did like chalk paintings outside of a jail in the States because their dad was like at the window and like looking out and like seeing like the birthday messages that they had left for him, which I have also heard of people doing at remand. You can set up on the sidewalk to visit people who are in there. But then he kind of ends the chapter by talking about like how like a CO came out and like washed it off the sidewalk. But was
that
kind
is
of
a threat to what the jail is trying to no, it literally is a threat. It's like that channeling of love is like what the jail wants
it
to
is
stop.
And he's talking too in this book about how like we obviously know that jails like inherently break up families and put like physical barriers between people having relationships with people, but he was saying that in the States too, the turn to technology, so like tablets, being able to like have phone calls or video messaging with people on the inside, has then pushed jails to then remove free in-person visits because they're like, oh, we have this tech now, just FaceTime. There's
And
no
then the
need for
tech
you
is
to
part of
like
it.
hug your child. Which I think are just things that for those of us who are supporting and care about people who are incarcerated to like be attuned to as kind of ongoing things that will need to be fought against.
I remember seeing during COVID, like at Stony Mountain, it was like 2 tables apart. You had to wear a mask. There was like no physical contact allowed. And I saw a like toddler run to their dad, and the dad had to like step away and like tell the mom, like, you know, and I was like it just gutted me. And this morning I was at a provincial institution, and there was some kids visiting, and it was no contact, and I just had to wonder like why agencies aren't advocating more for contact visits with kids, because that seems so like just heartbreaking to have to see your kids through glass or not be able to like pick them up and embrace them, and
bad for the kids who are supposedly at the center of this child protection, right? Like,
yeah. And it's kind of that balancing of, you know, like if it's an agency worker bringing them in, like you have to think about like what is the actual risk involved, right? And even just how that contributes to that disconnection, because you forget what they smell like or what their hugs feel like, or, you know, and that's so important for kids. And there's really interesting writing coming out about like Indigenous perspectives on child brain development and how those connections and relationships are like to moms but also to dads are so vital to healthy brain development. And like Anishinaabe and Cree teachings on like the different stages of life, like those that mentorship that you were talking about is so vital to moving through those different stages of child development, and how there's really like nuanced understanding of natural law built into some of those roles that dads play, and how those opportunities to provide that mentorship are so severed by the disconnection that comes with being in an institution or, you know, being pushed out by child welfare. Jessica Ball has an article called Ghost Fathers. Have you read that one? And I had my students read it last semester, and some of them work in child welfare, and a few of them said, I never really thought about this before. And, you know, she talks a lot about what we've been talking about, and just that stereotyping of dads as being inconsistent, or, you know, not wanting to communicate or not being cooperative, when really it's the system that's manufacturing their inability to voice what they want for their kids. And that's really frustrating and disheartening to kind of watch over and over, and not really have. I think also it requires that kind of humility from people who work in systems to say, okay, you know what, maybe I didn't do my best here. And to come back to the parent and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. But we don't ever see that. It's always very this like kind of cover your ass, I guess, kind of dynamic with systems, because of liability and all of those things that's so dangerous to those connections. And I hope that over time that people will come to the understanding that if you're going to claim to be working from the 7 teachings, that you need to understand what those mean from an Indigenous way of understanding, not a colonial way of understanding what truth and humility and you know, love are, but like really understanding and practicing what that looks like. Because I think if that did happen, there wouldn't need to be as much of a reliance on courts and legal systems. Like, it would be modeled and mentored and socialized in a way where that would kind of be like a last resort rather than the first step. And I think that's what you're talking about with prevention, is like providing the support to families up front with what they need to prevent it from getting there in a different way.
I think that social workers need to do a whole lot more self-reflection and healing work. Not every social worker, but many social workers. Yeah, if they went into this profession so they could have power over other people's lives, then they shouldn't be in that profession. If you're making decisions that affect other human beings, but those decisions don't feel good in your heart, then you shouldn't be making those decisions. But all of that comes with experience, and all of that comes with reflecting and learning through error. So there's self-reflection that needs to happen, and also self-assessment. Many social workers should look at their cases, you know, even just in the last 12 months. How did I do? Did I listen to that father when he was trying to tell me something? Or did I brush him off because I had 15 phone calls to return? You know, how am I really doing? Am I practicing the effective social work that I wanted to practice, that I envisioned myself practicing when I was still a student? Am I doing that, or did I get off track? Have I gone in a wrong direction? So in the U.S., I found an actual self-assessment tool that's being used by child welfare workers and encouraged to be used by child welfare workers. And that assessment tool does just that. It asks about 20 questions, and you answer yes, no, maybe, and you come up with a score about, okay, maybe there's some work to be done here. Because these are human beings that you're working with. These are not cases. These are not files. These are not paper, you know, a paper trail. Or these are not liability, like you said. These are not risks. If you're so worried about yourself professionally, if you're more worried about yourself professionally than you are about, you know, the work that you're doing with these families, then again, you really need to evaluate whether you're in the right profession or not.
Do you think that the system allows for like treating people like humans, not cases? Like, I'm just picturing like if every it does. Yeah. Okay. Good.
There's a whole lot of social workers that I know that are doing some pretty darn good work, and they're labeled as troublemakers. They're labeled as shit disturbers.
So maybe this is also a call to be a shit disturber.
Critical thinkers.
Yeah.
You have the responsibility to question everything.
Right. Everything.
So Dr. Grant Reed, a professor who's now passed away, but he taught me in the Faculty of Social Work years ago. He actually started to critique the assessment tools that were being used by child protection workers in the province. And he said, at best, some of these tools are ridiculous. Why are agencies using them? And of course, people in the CFS system was how dare you question us? How dare you? But I think that Dr. Reed was a perfect example of a professor to have, because as a student, I never forgot that. I never forgot that I have a responsibility to question everything. Just because my supervisor says it doesn't mean that it's right. Just because one of the managers is saying it doesn't mean that it's right. If it doesn't feel right in my heart, then it's not right. Don't ask me to do an apprehension if I'm not fully in it. Don't ever ask me to do that. And so I was 24, 25 years old telling my supervisor, don't ask me to do it. I won't do it. I will resign before I do something like that. Tear a family apart when it's not, when I think that there's more that can be done with that family. So having the courage to be disliked. And sadly that comes with experience, right? When you're 20 years old or 24 years old, 25 years old, you just left university, you want to start that career that you're so excited about. You don't want to be, making this person angry and making that person angry, but at the same time, you're the one who has to look yourself in the mirror at night and be like, did I do a good job today? Did I really provide the families with what they need, not with what I need?
Yeah, I love the call to be a shit disturber.
Being a shit disturber is an act of love.
Yes.
We've been told.
We have. And I think there's so many examples that we've talked about that demonstrate that, but from a place of unconditional love and a value system that really models like those natural laws that we talked about. And I think that's really kind of what I try to share with my students who are in the social work program. Like, I'm not a social worker, but just sharing those experiences of thinking critically and really questioning, like, what are the assessment tools that you're using and why do you use them and who do they benefit, I think are really important questions. And so I guess if you each have any final words of encouragement or final thoughts or plugs for awesome resources or people supports that we can end with.
I have a lot of plugs to make.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll just do a couple, but we're friends with the Prison Library Committee. The Prison Library Committee loves getting information to people on the inside, and they've given us some information. One of the resources that they have is Manitoba Law Library has a prison law library, and people who are locked up can call toll-free and talk to a law librarian to get resources for things that they want to know about. They have a lot of really good legal FAQ sheets, one of which is about what to do if you encounter CFS once you are no longer incarcerated. There's another good one on oh my gosh, I'm blanking, and I have like 20 papers here that I can't sort through.
Talking to a law librarian would be so much better than talking to a lawyer in so many
ways. I think it would be. They also have a FAQ on the children's special allowance settlement.
Oh, nice.
So if you want more information about those things, you can call the Manitoba Law Library at 1-866-814-8684. And also the Prison Library Committee has a service that they do. They have an email reference form. So if you're looking for kind of resources or information on things that aren't necessarily legal information specific, it could be on anything, you can talk to your librarian or your teacher, or an elder or program worker in kind of any of the institutions where you might be locked up, including Stony. And they have an email reference form that you can fill out with any of those people, and they will send it to the Manitoba Prison Library Committee, and they will send that information back to you and provide you copies of things that you're looking for if you want to research any topic.
Nice. Can you read the phone number one more time?
Yeah, the phone number for the Manitoba Law Library is 1-866-814-8684.
My plug is talk to Leona.
That's a great plug.
Well, thank you for that.
No, just that your experiences matter. Fortunately, you're developing expertise about these systems as you encounter them, and that matters. Share it, get together, build collective power.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bronwyn. My final thought would be that we all need to start having deeper conversations about Indigenous men and those who identify as men and their place in society. They're not victims. I would never, take away their dignity by calling them victims, but we still have to have conversations about how they are continuously victimized by systems. And so those are the types of conversations that we need to have. And then the idea that they have gifts to share, and if we're not listening to learn what those gifts are, then we're all doing a disservice. So thanks.
I feel like I can't top that, so that was a great way to close. I just appreciate the three of you sharing from such a loving and kind and gentle place. I think that's something that men often don't receive, but I think, like you said, is part of a deeper conversation that needs to start happening. And so I'm really grateful that we could have this conversation, and thank you, Steve, for supporting us and sharing your time and your space. It's been really awesome. So, chimikwach.